Alright, hell yeah. So we got out to the wave again. This is the second time in the RMR ThunderCloud. And I'm going to do a voiceover for about 11 minutes. I'm just picked the best footage that I had. So this is a common move that I do in my raft. And I'm going to talk about why some of the moves aren't as good. And then here some of the moves are better, where you're getting sucked in a little bit easier. I would say primarily there's a little bit of width on this boat that's, I don't know, let's say it's the same width, but it's kind of like a paddle cat style, like underfoot. The two tubes are 20 inches, and they're kind of, they're the lowest thing. The floor is actually kind of sucked up. In this footage, though, I actually did try to push out the floor as best as I could. I put those foam things underneath the thwarts, and that was a huge improvement. But it's just fascinating that I was able to do no spins. In my boat, man, I just do like spins like on a dime. And so the physics of that is very fascinating to me. So we spent a lot of time today just focusing on straight surfs, which my boat doesn't do very well because it's not super stable. It just wants to spin out. And so the two tubes that kind of act like paddle cat tubes in this round boat make surfing. And I've noticed that in catarafts, where catarafts will just get sucked down and glide down the wave. And so and then on both this boat and my blue boat, I guess they're both mine now, you know what I mean? But this, just in all R1 boats, this bow needs to be higher rocker. So you can see that it takes in water, and it's like 10 inches to 18 inches of bow. Let's say it's 12 inches of bow. Every time that hits, sometimes you just get a huge arc of water that comes in the boat that punches you out of the wave. And if you noticed other kayaks, they'll just slice right through. Even when I was running the RMR Fat Cat, hell yeah, you would just slice, the nose of the paddle cat into the wave, and it would actually, sometimes sub and then pop out, but you'd still be surfing. And so that's where you could have a modification on the bow of this boat, where you just had two points. You know what I mean? Kind of like Air makes like a toothed boat. I think it's the saber tooth. 2 teeth up front, and then just typical round back. Hell yeah, so right here we're doing one of the fundamental moves. It's where, we're only going to watch these, but we do this move a few times. It's where you're kind of on the lower side. So if I'm crossing over, I'm on that lower side. And the reason I want to be over here is because that right side of the boat's going to push up against maybe a wave. And so if I'm on that lower side, it's going to turn back. If I'm on the higher side or the closer side of a wave, typically you're just going to spin around it. Even that time, though, we even spun around. And so, hell yeah. So I'll try to point that out as much as possible. But even right here, my boat can easily spin on a dime on this. And so I have to figure out what the physics are underfoot, that's causing, well, I think, like one of the things that I know is my floor is so pushed out, especially near the rear quadrant and, the bow and stern, that when I jump to the diagonal, it tips and releases 3/4 of the boat. That is such a fundamental thing. Hell yeah. And it's even interesting, like, in the flats, is that if you jump to that quadrant, you're literally reducing the surface area just to that front diagonal or that rear diagonal. And everything else should be leveraged out of the water. What's happening with this RMR this RMR ThunderCloud, is that the floor isn't protruded. I'm trying to push it out as much as possible. But that other, like right here, that other tube that upstream tube just rails and digs in. And so the only way you're going to get that not to dig in is if you have like a V-shaped hole. Like if I jump to one side of the boat, the other side releases hella. And And so it's just kind of fascinating that in my boat the floor is already lower. I even push it out farther, and it makes those side surf moves just money. And especially on these small waves. And this small wave is such a good litmus test for stuff like that. So today we're just kind of working on, oh, and this is a good move over here. I'm on that left side, and to do, right here I need to do like 2 sweep strokes, just not to get pieced out that left side. And that is one of the harder maneuvers to do. And so hopefully I'll point that out again. Hell yeah, I think this is the same footage. So I'm going to be on this left side. I'm going to be moving towards the left side of the... Nope, that was different footage. Oh yeah, hell yeah. So right here I'm working on getting to the front of the boat. You know, even with my boat, I noticed that if the front hits early and you're near the front, now you are going to get pushed into the wave. You know what I mean? You're not all the way at the back. The back, if you were on the back right now, you would just teeter-totter out of the wave. And so if you're going to punch up against the wave up front and your body's close to the front, then that allows you to push. You know, it's pushing you into the bulk of the wave, and so you can actually stop that momentum. So hell yeah. So it's kind of what we were practicing. We have a few more footages of getting up close. Maybe that was it actually. But no, like right here, well, I don't know. There was one where, oh, this was just a good surf. So we actually show this one a couple times. But, you know, we talked about reducing that volume so you're not going to get so punched. You know, able to slice through. Higher rocker, lower volume. The other thing is that if you actually get that front to be more like a kayak, then you can actually, you know, do enders. Even on a small wave, it'd be fun to actually just, you know, throw some enders, just lay into that. So this is the same surf. We do pretty good. We're on that left side. Over here, the hard thing is just maintaining, not getting sucked to the left, because there is a wave to my left, and I don't want to turn around it. But luckily, that wave isn't so pillowy that it doesn't just grip me and turn me into like a smiley face turn. It's not a hole, but it's still, I still have to straighten it out, and it is very difficult to straighten the boat out with forward paddle strokes. And so I just have to be on top of my game and do those forward paddle strokes a little bit earlier, you know, before my boat already turns sideways. And that's the other thing with this. This boat surfs really well, but because those tubes are so large and they're so paddle cat kind of lower railed, is that the second it, you know, gets offline, like right here, the side of the boat just really tags water. And that's where, on my boat, the quadrants, you know, the diagonals, the front bow diagonals and the stern diagonals don't hit as much, you know what I mean? And I can get those out of the water. But here is just a constant. And then, you know, even with my boat, if I don't push out the floor, I have those same issues. But this boat definitely, it's definitely noticeable, you know what I mean? And so, hell yeah, where are we at? We're about 8 minutes, 9 minutes. So yeah, we only have 1 more minute. We do get better, you know, so kind of going back and forth. So here's the low side. So I'm going to low side, turn around. I guess that was done. But yeah, we're just trying to work on back and forth. You know what I mean? If I'm going, let's see where I'm on the low side. So there's, I'm on the high side. Now I'm on the low side coming back. And that's when we get pieced out. So, hell yeah, I'm going to point that out. So I'm on the high side making this turn. If I angle to the right, I'm a little bit on the low side. Now I'm on the high side, and so that, working on those sweep strokes, and now I'm on the low side, now I'm on the high side. Anyway, so I think that I'll make other videos on, you know, especially being on the low side and finding a balance point up against the wave. So, hell yeah. So that's the high side, so I have to sweep around. And then, just kind of holding it in there. Alright, hell yeah, looks like we got 50 more seconds of this. And then I just show all the clips, you know what I mean? But I just chose these 10 minutes to be the best, you know. So hell yeah, there's that low side. There's that low side turn. And now we're able to go to the other. No, just another low side turn. What I found over here on this low side turn is I need to get it going the other direction. Else you get pieced out. Anyway. There you go. So that's a low side turn. I know that's going to hook up. And I need to get kind of going the other direction. On this one, I think I get pieced out after that one. Hell yeah. And then just right there, because jumping to the other side doesn't release, you know what I mean? So I really do think a V-shaped hole. And it doesn't even need to be like, you can push out the floor. This boat, I'm going to really work on pushing out the floor just to see if I can get the dynamics to my boat. You know what I mean? And might as well modify my boat as much as possible, especially if there's further improvements with the V-shaped hole. Okay, I think we are past, that's it. You know what I mean? Now we're just getting into so that was that first move, and so now we just have standard footage, you know, just from the day. And it's considerably less performance than my blue boat, than the RMR, primarily because the floor doesn't stick out. But there are some benefits to the straight surfs. The nose is a little bit better because my floor sticks out farther. And so this nose has 2 points of contact. We've talked about that. But I think just going, you know what I mean, I could make an R1. Well, let's try it. Like right now, what I think I really want to is, well, I think one of the, oh, this is super hard. What the hell? You could just imagine a paddle cat with rails underneath, just next, you know, inside the middle portion. Still a paddle cat, but with rails that are lower, that you can edge the entire paddle cat. You can get the paddle cat out of the water. That's going to be the first test, and that's what I think you want a round boat. You know, get that other edge just totally out of the water, just very easily. And then you want quadrants. You want the floor to be protruded right where you sit on the thwarts, especially the stern, to where you can shift over onto that back diagonal. And when you do, you're literally into that corner, you're releasing 3/4 of the boat. And I think you do actually want a V-shaped hole. So right now when I'm just sitting on this tube, the other tube should be 9 to 10 inches out of the water. You know what I mean? And then if I edge harder, it gets farther out. But yeah, you should be able to regulate that. Just sitting in the neutral position on one side, the other side should be out of the water. I think it would be useful in a round boat to have 1 or 2 or 3 of the I-beams missing from the floor, and then just covered with normal material with drain holes. I think that's where you want your drain holes, and you don't want to get your foot trapped in the current drain holes. You also don't want any water to come in the bow or stern. Those should be totally fabriced over, even if they don't carry, you know, air. Hell yeah. And then, yeah, you want that reduced volume in the bow and stern, like, you know what I mean? And on the corners, too. So even on the diagonals, you want those to be pointed. That would be a tough consideration for a round boat. To get those, but just look at the front and sides, the front side, like the bow of any whitewater kayak, even like a creek boat, the side of the bow is just as slicey kind of as the front of the bow. Stern as well, just really low volume, especially with side hits, because you're always rotating the bow and stern through the water. And so every time that hits, and that is the huge detriment to these diamond-shaped boats with 12 to 20, you know, up front, is if you hit that, your boat's instantly turning. And then what happens with this boat is it's paddle cat, and this happens with the RMR Fat Cat. The tubes are so paddle cat-like that the second it catches water on that upstream, it's going to dig and turn, and it's almost impossible to release. And it's totally noticed the fact that I can't even do a spin. You know what I mean? But those attributes are what make this small boat stable. So if you're just looking to get into R1, these are actually attributes that most people prefer. I just, you know what I mean, I want every stroke to feel almost effortless. You know, I want to release as much of the boat as possible, even if it's a tip risk, you know, for even on simple class 3 rivers. You know what I mean? So there is the trade-off there. When you make a boat high performance, the possibility of tipping without high skill and awareness, that's going to go up. So hell yeah. So definitely V-shape hole. If you're neutral on one side, the other side should be released. If you jump to the diagonal, you should be able to control how much you're releasing and, you know, release 3/4. And then in other videos we talked about how it's very difficult to jump to the front of the bow. You can throw a knee up against that front thwart. So the front bow needs to start its rocker way early. And I've already made kind of a foam mock-up of that. And so I think we're on our way, you know what I mean, to actually put the physics behind these things, especially with my blue boat. You know, if I can modify this to actually get the same performance of my blue boat, then we kind of have a litmus test for that. But then all these design modifications, I'm trying to reduce the size of this just because, one, even with this boat, every paddle stroke is a little bit much. You know what I mean? It's like weightlifting, where I just don't think you need that in an R1 boat. You don't need all this boat. You know what I mean? And the cool thing about R1 to me primarily is this cockpit. You know what I mean? A certain width and depth to the I mean, like fore aft, side to side, and then the depth and the seated height. But you know what I mean? Like that, you can still reduce the size huge. You can get an 8-foot boat. You can get a 7-foot boat, even down to 6 feet. You know what I mean? Because you don't really need too much behind you and in front of you. And so there's just a real cool opportunity to make, you know what I mean? So just use your imagination and just imagine the cockpit, but then, you know, kind of reduced volume everywhere else. But definitely what I have learned that's going to be a little bit different than kayaks is that when you jump to the quadrant, you really want to release like a huge portion. You really want the boat to be leveraged up out of the water. And because the boat's much larger than a kayak, you can use that leverage as stability. You don't have that option in a kayak. The second you kind of go for your quadrants, you're almost in vertical moves. Like quadrant moves in a kayak are, you know, kind of vertical. You're already doing cartwheels. You're already bracing your paddle stroke. You're almost doing a roll at the same time of holding that, which is different in R1 boat. R1 boat, you can jump to a quadrant and get kind of heavy, crazy angles and still be stable. You know what I mean? It's even shown on a lot of the R1ers, especially the Colorado boaters, that, you know, are doing from the back of the boat stuff, just even in flat, getting the boat basically to go vertical. So that aspect is what you want all around the boat and accessible from the cockpit. And stair step. You could have double stair steps. You know what I mean? So if you did go to a quadrant, you know what I mean? One stair step is just a little shift. And then the second stair step could be a bigger shift where you're just like, okay, I'm releasing a little bit of 3/4 of the weight. And the other one is like, hell yeah, I'm turning the R1 into like a slalom turn. Hell yeah. The other thing I didn't mention in this footage was I was using my feet a lot, which is kind of interesting. I was using my feet in the RMR Fat Cat as well, and then in my boat now too. Especially if you're sitting on one side, you can always, I'm always having kind of my feet across, you know, towards the diagonal. And so if I want to weight that, then I paddle with my paddle and then try to dig my feet in. And so that effectively gets my weight half and half, or, you know what I mean, just kind of like a bridge. You're actually putting, let's say, half or sometimes all of your weight on that other side. And so I definitely noticed that when surfing. And so, hell yeah. Yep. All right. So I think that was pretty good, and it's useful for me to share my thoughts about the R1 design, so I get kind of crispier every time, and the physics make sense. But there's just attributes where it's just like, well, and then so there's good things too. You know what I mean? That's why I just don't want to knock things. I want to like notice physics and then say what the positives and the pros and cons are for different, you know, like what you're using that physics for. One of the things that I really noticed was the 20-inch tubes. Like, I think it does have a place, like especially, and then I don't know if it's one of the YouTubers yesterday's news was talking about just different cat designs, how you can take cat tubes and kind of put two of them together, you know what I mean, or just different ways to make an oval. And so, you know, if it is inflated, like I think it would be very useful to figure out a way to make a diamond shape side. And so I think just in front or near the thwarts, or just kind of in the middle cockpit, 20-inch tubes. Well, no, because you still want those edges and those stair steps. And so it'd be kind of fascinating, because still when I'm in the middle of the boat, I still want to be able to edge and have that secondary stability. But hell yeah, so that's where, you know, I'm really intrigued of making a boat out of foam, fiberglass, and getting these shapes kind of dialed in of like what would be the perfect shape. And I think I'm getting better at, you know, figuring out exactly what I want to be like. Yeah, I know where I don't want material. You know, we already talked about the bow and the corners, and that's where, you know, like if you the RMR owners that own the Storm, it's just it's just really difficult to do play maneuvers and waves, because your boat is like much more rectangular and much flatter on the tubes. Like, this is flat enough because they're such large tubes and they don't diminish. You know, we talked about how it's not like, even this is a high rocker boat, but it's still not enough rocker. You know what I mean? Or the rocker is just about right, but just removing a small amount of material, you know, here and there, getting the floor to be lower. If I could get the floor to be a huge stair step, almost like a 4 to 6 inches lower, then your edge would be released, and then I can test the 20-inch, you know, tube after a stair step, because mine after a stair step is a little bit grippy. And so that is the benefit of these 20-inch tubes that I've noticed, even from Ben Lloyd's footage of just really crushing it and just sending himself into some of these big holes. The 20-inch round tubes, and even catarafts, have shown that those oversized tubes, especially near the midpoints, you know what I mean? So right around the thwarts, what I would like to see is the 20-inch tubes around the thwarts, but then the cockpit to diminish. I don't think you really sit in the middle. Like, of the boat, I don't think I'm ever, even if I'm jumping to the front, I don't think I'm actually maybe sitting out to the side as much. That's going to be a hard one to figure out, but if you had a cutout in the middle, it would make re-entry so much easier. The 20-inch tube is a little bit much to climb in, you know, just to be like, hell yeah. But, you know what I mean, these 20-inch tubes, and you could even go more, you know what I mean? I think there is an opportunity to put as much volume where you need it in a raft when it's helpful, especially if it's secondary stability. But where you don't want it, for my taste, is, you know, especially bow and stern where that's hitting, and then the whole flat area all the way across. And so, and that really solidifies, I talked about how you have the design where it's like a rescue jet boat, where you have sponsons. You have whatever shape you need underfoot, doing the hydrodynamics and, you know, like the but then you have engaged sponsons for that stability. And so all those tubes, the purple tubes are your stability. They're just, you know, getting purled. They're gripping. And so that's where I've worked on my blue boat to even prevent as much of that as possible. Like even in my blue boat, it's still too much. And so, hell yeah. So that's where we're going to be modifying my blue boat and this one, hopefully to an extreme degree, to where I can actually be like, hell yeah, I do want a 6-inch stair step in this location. You know what I mean? And and if the boat tips at kind of a wonk angle, I want to actually foam out the cockpit, so I'm now sitting, you know, so at least the cockpit's level. You know what I mean? And that gets down to the V-shaped hull. And no, this is a good place to end it, because I'm going to be done talking. Is that in R1 Raft, there's so much raft, and there's so many places where you want to jump to the diagonal, and you know, you have 4 diagonals, you have 2 edges, you know, so that's 6 points. We talked about how you can have them progressive, and hell yeah, and even where I sit, you know, I want that omnidirectional, where I'm on a flat surface right here, and then I can edge even harder, or I can jump to the diagonal. And in the neutral, the other side is already V-shaped hold and just released. So like right now, I'm heavily edged, and the other side was up out of the water just a little bit. I want that just to be the normal, natural position. And so that's what we're working on. The next footage, once it gets at least 35 degrees consistently this winter, I have 2 kayaks that I'm lashing together with a V-shaped design. So when I'm sitting on one like an R1 boat, kind of cockpit style, the other one is out of the water. We've already tested that with one kayak and just leveraging the weight. And that's the other thing. With this, it's crazy. I mean, well, it's cool and crazy, the fact that you can just jump to one corner and have all this boat being leveraged, and you can get down to like whatever size footprint you want. So that's where in an R1 boat you can have places that are omnidirectional, that are just like spin like a top. You can jump to your diagonals where, and those can be so progressive. You know what I mean? You can jump to the diagonal, and then you can even jump to the, you know, farther to the bow or farther back to the stern diagonal, you know. And so you have just multiple points where you can actually put your weight down. And what I have found, even jumping to the diagonal, especially up in the front, is that you reduce the boat now down to like a 4-foot little boat. And especially if you can release all 3 quarters. And that's especially useful for diving that footprint in and getting like some depth, and releasing the other tubes, especially when catching harder eddies. You know what I mean? And so one of the things with R1 is like sometimes the current just takes you, and you're just like, nah, you need to be hell yeah. I guess I'll just put it simply. Sometimes the boat surfs, and you're just like, hell yeah, I can just, like, the only way I'm going is sideways. It's actually hard to actually stay in a wave. But then that's sometimes a detriment, where it's like it's hard to even cross a heavy current. Let me get some water. And so having this perfect amount of drive and surf. And so, hell yeah. And then, you know what I mean? I think, oh yeah. And so this, with a round boat with the split down the middle, I really want to try that. It could strike out, and it'd just be too grippy. or it could actually release, like a paddle cat's got a strip down the middle. It's just typically really wide, you know what I mean? Almost at least over 20 inches, at least over 2 feet wide in that location. But I think, you know, even just getting down to something that's like 8 inches wide, that would be very fascinating. I will say from today's footage, having hella side rocker, it reduces stability. My boat actually is rounded side to side, but that's where I can actually lay down a side surf. Then I can actually like surf it, side surf in, side surf out. And that's where I want the V-shape hole. I want a V-shape hole, but also on those surfaces to be kind of rounded as well. So kind of like a V-shape, but not too, you know, a little bit rounded as well. And so you can, I mean, basically the cool thing with the R1 boat is if you are sideways, now your boat is just 5 feet, which is like a small play boat. You know what I mean? So when you're side surfing, it's just like a very wide play boat that you're just, you know, plugging in back and forth. If you had a play boat that was just twice as wide and you're sitting in it like a kayaker, cool, you're just, you know, kind of plugging back and forth. And so that's kind of what I noticed. And that's where you know, you want your even sides of the boat to maybe, from a sponson perspective, especially up near where you're sitting on the side, to be able to, like, you know, edge in. Yeah, so that's the main difference. If you look at a play boat, and especially an OC1 play boat, like, yeah, so that just says it, because all this technology is there from the kayaks, is that the OC1 on the sides of an OC1 should look exactly like the sides of an R1 raft. And so the round tube is useful because, you know, the 20-inch tube is useful, but modifying that shape a little bit will be more useful. Alright, so I think I'm done talking. But, hell yeah, I just really feel like the physics is coming together. Yeah, so hell yeah. And definitely, I mean, the simplest thing to do would be for one of the raft manufacturers, like, let's take RMR. I was just thinking about this. If they could just make a mini, I mean, because this is an R2 boat, you know what I mean? Just the way it's designed, it's kind of paddle cat. It's still difficult to paddle R1, you know what I mean? I've already had to modify the floor to release a little bit, and it felt a little bit better today. But it's just, even like the NRS was just kind of an interesting design that was an anomaly, you know, that, and there was only a handful of those out there, and it's just interesting. No one's talking physics in the raft world when it comes to R1. All the technology is just came from R2, and you know, Shredders was the first, you know, R2 R1 you know, in that was substantial. But round boats have their own unique physics to them, and hell yeah. So yeah, it'd just be so fascinating. Like, even if well, and I just don't think that you would want to just, or what am I saying? It would be cool if RMR had like a 6-foot boat, a 7-foot, but you could just do the tiniest boat. Like, I would paddle a 6-foot boat. You know, just go to the extreme. Like, hell yeah. 6-foot, narrow, and then still with an R1 cockpit, just barely big enough, you know, to be like, do your thing. Comfortable still. Like, because look at this. This cockpit is still real small, but it's big enough for me. You know, it's perfect size. And look how much bow and stern that you could chop off. You know what I mean? And still have rocker. And it seems like you can't, but this has such a flat. You don't notice how much flat even my boat has. And, yeah, so you could really reduce a lot of that. And if you reduce the width, you reduce the wetted area. And that's the big thing with these boats, just R1 in general. The wetted area with a 5-foot beam is so much wetted area that it's just difficult to paddle. It's just a lot of boat to paddle. Like, it's hard to maintain speed. And so that's where the NRS was just an anomaly, where the floor was just a little bit lower. And when you're sitting, it's just a little bit tippier. And that was the interesting thing, because like I was paddling even when my first year with canoers, and the canoers were just surprised that I could keep up. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought this is a small raft. And it wasn't until Star made their high five. And then I actually never got a chance to use it, but the company owner was like, no, this thing's different than yours. And it's kind of PaddleCat style. You have 2 PaddleCat tubes, and I now have the opportunity to use that because I got the RMR Fat Cat. And yes, it has its own, you can generate potentially more speed, but at the cost of, like, it feels like a bear to do so. Where, like, my NRS, the fact that you can reduce the wetted area to, like, the footprint of a kayak, let's say. Now it's just a kayak that's heavily loaded. I mean, you got people on the Stikine heavily loading kayaks, and I need better words for the hydrodynamics, but the aerodynamics, the fluid dynamics of the kayak remain the same. It doesn't matter the weight. It'd just be like a heavier paddler. Still, the boat's still doing the same thing. But wetted area, what happens is you reduce spin. Like, spinning is tough. And we talked about how the wetted area with flat is just going to turn on you. And so those are attributes that are typically of a paddle, of just a cataract, where you have huge oars to counterbalance the leverage. In a cataract, the raft feels nimble because you can just totally overpower that. In an R1, it's very useful to be able to, like, being able to rotate a boat is so fundamental to R1. And yeah, so it's just kind of fascinating. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more of the R1 design, is that having 2 rails. So the 2, if you're going to make it inflated, the 2 in the floor, the I-beams of the floor next to the perimeter tubes, the ones on the inside, those are the most crucial. And that's where you can have a round boat and a PaddleCat have the same technology, where those 2 rails are lower, and they can be rockered. I think you want them to be rockered and lower. But those are going, and those actually could be your flats. See, that's what happened. Yeah, so let's talk physics, because on my boat's floor is actually really flat. And I think that's what's giving it a lot of the speed. It's lower, so it's almost just this lower, rigid, flat surface, almost like a sup. And then all the other tubes are elevated. Let's say there's no wetted surface in the other tube. So now you have this kind of like sup surface that's fairly fast. And I definitely have to mention that, because what happens is that sometimes you have an idea of what the physics is that's not the reality. You're just assuming something's happening. And so that shows that I don't think you'd want like a totally rounded boat where it's just like too much rocker, because I think you would just be slow. And with an R1 boat, you have a lot of boat to work with, so you do want, in a couple areas, longer surfaces that mimic like slalom kayaks, like even a sprint kayak. Yeah, so I think those 2 rails on the I-beam floor that are next to the perimeter tubes on the inside could be your flat surface. But for sure, they have to end near the stern to make that omnidirectional point. That's real crucial. And they definitely have to, so I don't know, you do need a flat surface, for surf. Like any, maybe you don't, but like these are overly flat. Like this is supposed to be a high rocker boat, but your middle tubes are overly, like even the Sotar Merlin, overly flat for a large majority of it, and you get stability. But what I'm trying to do is to get as much performance, get the paddle stroke where you can get the paddle stroke to feel effortless, and then basically take an R1 boat and have it just as fast and just do just the same kayak moves that you can do. So hell yeah. So I guess yeah. I think I'm done because it sounds like I'm just experimenting in my head. But hell yeah, the V-shaped hole, maybe a strip down the middle. Um, yeah, it's just I guess what I was talking about in that last 5 minutes is where do you want your sections? I don't think you want your flat sections out to the side. I think you can. Oh, no, no, no. Sorry about that. Is if the perimeter tubes are raised, like we were talking about, when you edge on the side, I think what you want is just like a snowboard. When you edge a high rockered snowboard, you increase its surface area. So that's unique. Kayaks don't do that. If you're in a slalom kayak and you edge, you actually decrease your surface area because it's rounded. And what I think you can have is 2 points. One, when you edge, you're increasing that surface area, and then a second stability point where then you decrease it. And so if you edge in the center of the boat extra hard, then there's actually this, middle sponson, area. And I think it's used. You could have the sponson just right off the point of the middle, but I think it is useful to always have 2 points of contact. So you could have a double sponson near both of the thwarts on the side. But hell yeah! So a slight edge, you're increasing that length. A heavy edge, now you're decreasing it. And yeah, it's just super cool that you could have, all these different edges, and progressive. So I'm seriously going to be, carving out some foam and then trying to test some of this stuff, actually make a real prototype. And the cool thing is I can start with a 6-foot boat, you know what I mean? Just like absolute tiny, and then the materials aren't that crazy. And that's honestly like what I am actually interested in, because paddling around a lake in an R1 boat is still exhausting. My boat is actually fairly, enjoyable. And that's where, from pushing out this floor, to be kind of fascinating if I get the physics of this to also be the same enjoyability. But this is just it's definitely harder to paddle. But like I said, from the physics perspective, you're going to get a lot of those stabilities. So this is a great boat for R1ing to know that hell yeah, it's stable. I kind of figured that out last year, that I don't think I'd want a lot of people in my R1 boat because you're going to flip way too much. And most people that R1, they really want to push their limits to kind of show what the sport can do. And that puts you in riskier environments. And flipping an R1 boat is hella more dangerous than flipping a kayak, because your roll is, and compared to catarafts don't flip that often, and when they do, it happens. But my R1 Raft is I could just flip over on something tiny, and even over the years that I've R1'd, I still don't have exactly that down, and a lot of that actually can improve by getting a more unstable boat, like a more boat that has more edges. Hell yeah. So in my boat, if I do put a lot of rocker side to side, it can flip over a lot easier. And so that's where things like sponsons, like that, third stability point, could be very useful. Also, you know, if my boat has too much rocker side to side and it's too rounded and kind of just flips out, to have that middle I-beam removed. I'm very interested in that because that turns a round boat into a paddle cat. It gives you that paddle cat railed where you potentially want it, just like right underfoot. You know, particular with those two I-beams that I've been talking about. But then if I'm on one side, the other I-beam comes out of the water. So you have this double, you know, basically it'd be like a paddle cat that you can edge where you can get the other tube out of the water. That is very fascinating to me. Or you can sit more neutral and put both tubes in to get that stability. And so it's kind of, you know, both worlds. What I have found is that if you have too round of a surface and then no hard catches, then the second, like from a physics perspective, oh, here's the comedy, so I might have to throw in some more footage. Alright, hell yeah. Before we get to the closing thought, I definitely want to say that I want a boat for the lake. And that could be the first thing that I make. You know, it could literally be 5 feet long. The cockpit only has to be this cockpit. It could be 20 by 20, you know, 20 inches by 20 inches. But I just think it's just very fascinating to lay down all these corners, you know, lay into the diagonals. From this position, could you do cartwheels? You know what I mean? And just have all these different edges and just to experiment with that. And so I think that, you know, and then just me, I just need something like that. If I just only have flat water, I want R1. And that's just, we're taking these 10-foot boats to the lake. I don't see anyone else doing it and posting. And it's because it's, you know, they're barges. You know, there's something kind of different about the NRS boat that was just like, oh, it frees it up, where I feel like a paddle stroke can get me glide. And that's where, for the R1, for the future R, we need more of that. We need to be like, hey, like a very simple paddle stroke can just really, you know what I mean, carry us. And hell yeah. Alright, so final thoughts, booyah. But from a physics perspective, last thing, once your torque is making the boat flipped on a rounded surface, the boat's going to flip. That's why, you know, hard chined kayaks, you actually lay those edges in, and it's very useful in that regard. Alright, so hell yeah. So here's the comedy. If you want to watch this, booyah. And hey, thanks for joining me on this. This was good. And hell yeah.
We just have one more comedian. He's here all the way from beautiful, sunny Helena, Montana. He's fucking hilarious. Make it nice and loud for Dex. Everybody make some noise for Dex, yes.
Hell yeah. What up? And those are registered trademarks. Hey, give it up for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Or if you're Lindsey Vonn, the Squid Games. Someone told me I look like a stunt double of Keanu Reeves. Masturbating. Don't get caught masturbating. Oh, which reminds me, don't go to the dentist extremely tired. You will pop a sleep boner. Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because when Ted shows up at our orgies, it gets weird. He dresses like a 7 and always wants to eat a 9. Plot twist, at our orgies, my name is Ted. My only goal in life is to look like Captain Crunch. Actually, my goal is to be in the next Cobenfy commercial. My schizoaffective disorder would be way better with some cocaine money. If I see a homeless person eating out of a trash bin, I just think they're from the future, and their stomach is a flux capacitor. I think overpopulation could be stopped just by doing whatever it is I'm doing. If meth had its own billboard, it would say, "Don't fuck up your life without meth." If you just got dentures, now is the perfect time to try meth. That's not on the billboard, just a public service announcement. If you hang out with me, you will pay a lot of small prices. My towels want to throw me in. Hell yeah, if you call it billiards, there's an 85% chance you're clinically depressed. There's an 85% chance I'm gonna get beat up tonight. Hey, with the little white magic marker, the sign out of town says 169 miles to Great Balls. You have to take the long road to get to Great Balls. Great Falls would be cooler if it was cooler. Great Falls should actually change their name to Great Cheese. Tourists would come from all over and ask, "Where's the great cheese?" I would hand them a cheese grater and say, "Get to work." I'm not married because I watched The Sandlot when I was 8. Forever. Yeah, it hits deep, doesn't it? Forever. I guess everyone's married. Cable TV. Oh yeah, I would watch more cable TV if it was called Shark Tank. Cinnamon Toast Crunch is now eating itself. That's General Mills' new ad slogan. And this week's cannibal joke. My new ad slogan is lots of small prices. That's what you'll have to pay. See what I did there? I got all my jokes this week from AI. Here's my only animal joke. If you were peanut butter, toast, 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 balls, dog. I don't want to die, so thanks for Tim for not doing crowd work. I opened a spam email that said, "One simple trick Asians do to increase penis size." It said, "Reincarnate." Well, that joke cost me $5. That was your free Corona. See, every week I get to tell one racist Asian joke. If life was a dream, right now I would ask Amanda for one of her world famous hand jobs. That was pretty good. All right, my name's Dex. Have a great night.
All right, keep it going for Dex. Keep it going for all of our performers tonight. Thanks for coming out today, you guys. We're going to be here every Thursday. Tell all your friends. Tell all your friends that think they're funny and want to get up here on stage. Hang out, buy some drinks, have some drinks. Yeah, I love you guys. See you soon.